is how the judge will sentence him. Clearly, mental health is a mitigating factor, or certainly a consideration, I should say, in this case. What we've heard so far is that the judge says that a hospital order is not the most suitable way of dealing with the case, and that Chail will receive a prison sentence. But in the short term, from what we're hearing there, it's most likely that Chail will remain in Broadmoor for the foreseeable future until he is well enough to see out a custodial sentence. He, of course, has previously had mental issues. We were hearing about how he was psychotic. There was some disagreement with 3 different mental health experts as to the extent of his mental illness. Some aspects to this include him believing that he was going to avenge a massacre in India by killing the Queen, that he had an AI, that's an artificial intelligence girlfriend, he believed, and he believed that she was real and not actually loving him because of its programming. He also was a bit of a Star Wars fanatic, to say the least, and dressed as a Sith Lord, wearing an iron mask made at a forge when he was carrying his loaded crossbow, and he was seeking infamy and some kind of personal legacy by doing this. The discussions there are centering around exactly how much mitigation will be given for his mental health, and I think at some point we may be able to go back to the Old Bailey so we can hear the judge continue to pass that sentencing. But just to remind you of where we are at the moment, Chail must receive a prison sentence but will stay in hospital for now. Back to the Old Bailey.
From mental disorder, this offence would fall into Category A, higher culpability. There was significant planning, and the defendant had a visible weapon in the video. It is Category 1, harm, because he caused very serious distress to some of those who saw it. His sister said that it reminded her of a terrorist video and that it was really shocking. Mr. Powell, a friend, said that the video made him feel terrified. It is plain that the defendant wanted it shared as widely as possible, including with news media. He had referred in his journal to a need for being known. The film would be extremely disturbing to anyone who saw it. Category 1A offence has a starting point of 4 years custody and a range of 2 to 7 years custody. The prosecution have submitted that the uniquely serious nature of this offending places it at the top of or beyond the top of the sentencing range in the guideline. I agree. The overall context of the offending cannot be ignored. He sought to publicise his intention to kill the sovereign when he was in the process of trying to put that intention into effect. Take a figure of 8 years custody after allowing for age, remorse and the absence of previous convictions, which I then reduced to 80 months on account of mental disorder, before allowing credit of 1/3 for the plea of guilty. That would result in a sentence of 53 months custody for making threats to kill, again before making any allowance for totality. So finally, I have to decide what the effective overall sentence should be. There are 3 separate offences here which involve different criminal conduct. I have to ensure that the total sentence is just and proportionate, and that there is effective punishment for separate offences, whilst acknowledging, as I do, that they were all part of one overall plan. A just and proportionate sentence is unlikely to be achieved simply by adding up the separate sentences for each offence. It would not be achieved in this case, and I must therefore make an allowance for what is called totality. I shall do that by reducing what would otherwise be the appropriate sentences for the offences in counts 2 and 3. Again, this requires an exercise of judgment by me. The sentences will run consecutively to each other, and they will take effect one after the other in the order that I pronounce them. The defendant must pay the statutory surcharge. The defendant will remain in hospital pursuant to the order I make under Section 45A of the Mental Health Act 1983, until he is considered well enough to be discharged to custody, up until one half of the period of the sentences on counts 1 and 2 has expired. If well enough, he would be transferred to custody to serve any period which remained of one half of the sentences on counts 1 and 2. Then the sentence on count 3 will take effect. If he is in custody when it begins to run, because treatment has concluded, after 2/3 of that sentence, the defendant could be released on licence, but only if the parole board considered it safe to do so. There will be an additional licence period which is necessary to protect the public. If the defendant breaches the terms of any licence or commits a further offence during its currency, he is liable to be returned to custody. Mr. Chail, on count 1, the sentence is one of 44 months imprisonment. On count 2, the sentence is one of 16 months imprisonment. On count 3, the sentence is one of 48 months imprisonment with an extended licence period of 5 years. The total sentences amount to 9 years custody with a further licence period of 5 years. The defendant may go down.
OK, so the sentencing there has now finished. In the case of Jaswant Singh Chail, the overall verdict on the sentencing there was that he will be sentenced to a total of 9 years with an extended licence period of 5 years. Count 1, of course, which was in relation to treason, has been coming in at 44 months. And then there were count 2 and 3 of possession of offensive weapon and threats to kill, 16 months and 48 months, respectively. He will begin that sentence in Broadmoor in a secure mental facility, and then as and when he is deemed fit to go into main custody at a prison, he will then go there and serve out the remainder of his sentence. We heard a lot there about the circumstances that led up to this particular situation. Whilst it was acknowledged that the man involved had significant mental health problems, it was also acknowledged that he, according to the judge, had violent tendencies and threats to kill before he actually developed psychosis. It was difficult, of course, to pinpoint exactly when he developed psychosis. I believe we can go now to Cameron Walker, who is our royal correspondent, who's been at the Old Bailey for us. Cameron, yes, a very unusual case which has now concluded with an overall sentence of 9 years with 5 years on licence for a man who attempted to kill the Queen with a crossbow on Christmas Day a couple of years ago.
Yeah, it's incredibly rare for a case such as this. The last time was in 1981. Jaswant Singh Chail, as you said, has just been sentenced to 9 years in custody with a further 5 years on licence. The judge was essentially weighing up there whether or not mental health played a factor in this case and whether or not a custodial sentence, a prison sentence, or indeed a hospital order was most appropriate. And what the judge concluded was that it is essentially going to be a mixture of the two. He accepted that on Christmas Day 2021, when he carried out these offences, he was in a state of psychosis, as per some of the mental health experts had given evidence in court. That's what they said. But he did say that there was some premeditated planning when Chail was not in a state of psychosis. So what the judge has concluded is that the three separate offences, the sentences being given to those 3 separate offences will run consecutively. That means one after the other. So 44 months in custody for count 1, that is the Treason Act 1842, intent to injure or alarm the sovereign. 16 months for count 2, that's an possession of an offensive weapon. And 48 months for count 3, that is with a threat to kill the Queen, and with an extended licence of 5 years. So the judge has ordered Chail to remain at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital until he is well enough to serve that custodial sentence. Now, this is a summary of Chail's crimes and why he has been sentenced to 9 years in prison.
The moment a self-styled assassin was arrested in the grounds of Windsor Castle. carrying a powerful crossbow capable of firing bolts with lethal force. His target, Queen Elizabeth II. Jaswant Singh Chail was captured on CCTV wandering Windsor town centre before carrying out his crimes. On Christmas morning 2021, he climbed the castle's outer fence using a nylon rope ladder. Chail spent 2 hours inside the grounds close to the late Queen's private residence, where she and members of her family were spending the festive day. Eventually challenged by police, Chail told officers, "I am here to kill the Queen."
He was a dangerous individual, intent on doing harm to Her late Majesty the Queen. And if it hadn't been, as I say, for the officers on the day, this could have been a very different outcome. But the officers are there for that reason, to protect the royal family and others that warrant that protection.
Hours earlier, wearing dark clothes and a metal mask, the Star Wars fanatic WhatsApped a video to family and friends, apologising for what he was about to do. When he was arrested, police found a note written by Chail. Should he be killed by police during the assassination attempt, he asked, "Please don't remove my clothes, shoes, gloves, mask, etc. I don't want a post-mortem. I don't want to be embalmed." He then apologised for his actions. Chail said he was seeking revenge for the Amritsar massacre in 1919, when British troops opened fire on thousands of Indians. In a journal, he wrote that if the Queen was unobtainable, he suggested Prince Charles, now king, would be a suitable figurehead for revenge. Charged with treason, making a threat to kill Her late Majesty, and having a loaded crossbow in a public place, the young man from Southampton was assessed at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, which found he did not exhibit extremism. He pleaded guilty to all charges. During hearings at the Old Bailey, the court heard Chail had applied for the Army, a special police force, Royal Marines and the Royal Navy in a bid to get close to the royal family. It also heard he was encouraged and bolstered to do what he did by an artificial intelligence, virtual girlfriend who he'd exchanged more than 5,000 sexual messages with. Chail's barrister, Nadia Chabat, said he apologised to the royal family and the king in a letter to the court, where he expressed distress and sadness about the impact of his actions. His treating psychiatrist, Dr. Christian Brown, recommended a hospital order, but Professor Nigel Blackwood for the prosecution said the attack was carefully planned and Chail was well aware it was wrong. The 21-year-old becomes the first person to be sentenced under the Treason Act of 1842 in more than 40 years. Cameron Walker, GB News.
Well, Chail's mother, father and twin sister were in court to hear Jaswant Singh Chail's sentencing. The judges ordered him to stay at Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital to receive further treatment until he is well enough to be transferred to prison for his 9-year sentence, plus a further 5 years on licence.
Cameron Walker, thank you very much, our royal correspondent outside the Old Bailey for the sentencing there. Lots to unpack about that particular case. A vast swathe of very unusual different elements to it, and I think not least as well the role that AI and artificial intelligence may well have played. We'll be discussing that a little bit later on. But in other news, big news in the battle to solve the migrant crisis, Britain is about to sign a deal that will give us access to the EU intelligence services, apparently. More than 25,000 migrants across the Channel this year, but a deal with the Frontex border agency could well be confirmed next week. It will mean Border Force officials will be able to track migrants and their movements and people smuggling across Europe. I'm joined now by GB News' political editor, Christopher Howe. Christopher, thank you very much. What will this deal mean? And is it going to suck the wind out of Labour's sails? Because I think they were trying to do something similar.
Well, they are, and this is all about is sharing better intelligence with those on the continent, because the big issues here. Today we have Rishi Sunak in Granada in Spain. He wants to do a deal. He's talking to Belgium, Serbia, other countries about doing a similar deal to Albania. The Albania deal, of course, has cut, according to the government's own figures, small boats crossings by a fifth since it was signed. They want to do more of that. And this kind of getting closer to the EU, whether you like it or not, if you back Brexit or not, is a way to deal with the small boats crisis, according to the government.
OK, interesting. And greater cooperation with Europe is not necessarily the most popular thing.
No, but we're seeing more of it. We've seen this the way that on the issue of the net zero targets on new diesel cars, new petrol cars. Now we're back in line with the EU. I should say this thing in this. So it's not the EU meeting today. It's the European Political Community meeting, set up in October 2022 by France after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So they're all there. Zelensky's there, Macron's there. What's fascinating to me as a journalist is that the next meeting is in the UK in the spring.
Wow.
So we're going to have all of the leaders of Europe, that's all the EU leaders, plus associate smaller countries in Britain in the spring. That'll be fascinating. And what happens to Keir Starmer in that meeting? Is he invited along? He could be the Prime Minister by the end of the year. What happens next? And the mood music of the UK's position, adjacent to but not part of the EU will be fascinating to watch.
No, it will indeed. And we've got Labour Party conference next week.
Yeah.
And Labour was saying, look, what they will do if they come into power, the way that they're going to stop the migrant crisis is close cooperation with Europe. Is it this?
It is this, really.
Okay.
So Keir Starmer, of course, has been out to The Hague. He spoke to Europol. He's talked to that meeting in Paris I went to. I stood outside the meeting. He wouldn't say what was discussed. Half an hour on his own with Emmanuel Macron. They want to do more. They're hoping that the mood music around Labour being pro-EU, of course, literally pro-EU by being Keir Starmer's situation as being the former Shadow Brexit Secretary, will feed into better relations. But frankly, Rishi Sunak's doing pretty well on his own. I mean, he's trusted on the world stage. He's at home on the world stage. He calls railways railroads. He's international in outlook, and they quite like him now.
Interesting. OK, Christopher, thank you very much. Christopher Hope there, our political editor, just whizzing us through what we can expect in terms of the developments towards tackling the migrant crisis, the small boats crossings, greater cooperation with Europe and greater intelligence sharing as well. Potentially sucking the wind slightly out of Labour's sails, as I was saying. It's Labour Party conference next week, and they will basically say that we're going to do something very similar. So what's the point of difference there? But more on that story on our website, gbnews.com. It's the fastest growing national news website in the country. All the best analysis, big opinion, and, of course, all the latest breaking news. But this is another big story, I think, and we're going to be having a couple of debates on this later on. So the average rent for UK homes outside of London has reached record highs of almost £1,300 a month. That is according to the property portal Rightmove. But there's a lot more to this story. Rishi Sunak criticised for not mentioning housing at all during his conference speech. A lot of young people feel massively let down generally by the housing market in Britain. Are young people too entitled when it comes to a desire to own a home? Have they actually got a point? Do they actually just spend too much money on avocados and expensive coffee? But here to break down the numbers is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. OK, so what's going on in terms of these figures, then?
Well, these figures are pretty eye-watering if you're having to pay rent, and 20% of households in the UK are now in the private rented sector. That's doubled over the last couple of decades. These numbers that came out this morning are from Rightmove, which is a property portal, like an information service. We can take a look at them. What they show, Patrick, is that the average UK rent is now £1,278 a month. That's 10% higher than this time last year. That's outside of London. Within London, within the capital, the average rent, crikey, £2,627 a month. Of course, people are paying this out of their post-tax income. That's 12% up on last year. And this is basically because there's so few rental properties, because there's nearly enough properties in the first place. And so the average rental property now attracts 25 inquiries, be they email inquiries, viewings, phone calls to agents. That's more than 3 times what it was this time last year. Just 8 inquiries on each rental property last year. And here's a few scores on the doors. The hottest rental market in the country, the town with the sharpest increase in rent, Luton, that's right, in Bedfordshire, 30-odd miles north of London, and also up 20% or more over the last year, rents in Loughborough in the Midlands, Preston in the northwest, Edinburgh, of course, and Paisley in Scotland. So rents in London are higher, but rents outside London are going up faster than they are in certain parts of the capital.
Yeah, I mean, we unquestionably have a housing crisis. We will be having a debate, like I said, a bit later on about whether or not young people have a right to feel entitled to home ownership. It can be argued that it has a knock-on effect on a lot of other aspects of life, when you start a family, therefore birth rate.
Oh, no, it's absolutely clear. The evidence is absolutely clear. This lack of housing, the fact that young people if they're lucky enough to get a rental, can't get out the rental by buying their own home, that is now messing with demography. And let me just say a little thing about avocados and trips to Ibiza and expensive coffee. It is, you know, I know the GB News inbox is full of people saying, why should these kids buy a house when they spend so much money on consumer goods and so on? But this, and when I bought my first house, the emails often go, interest rates were 15% and now they're only 5%. Look, let me say this. The thing about interest rates at the moment is they are higher than they were, and they're relatively low by historic standards. But the houses are much, much, much more expensive as a share of income. So back in the 90s into the 2000s, the average house was 4 or 5 times average income. The average house now is 9 or 10 times average annual income. So even at 5% interest rates, today's young home buyers are spending a much higher share of their incomes on their mortgage payments than when people were buying houses when interest rates were 12 or 15%.
No, indeed. And that, I think, made it even more surprising that Rishi Sunak didn't actually mention housing. There were quite a few young people at Tory party conference.
There were lots of young people at Tory party conference. I spoke at several fringes on housing issues. The rooms were absolutely rammed. Often a third to a half of people in the room were clearly, you know, people in their 20s, which is unusual for a Tory conference. We'll have to see what Labour does. If Labour start talking about housing, and if they start talking particularly about social housing, council housing, in my view, that is where the real issue is. The party that really gets hold of this and starts building social housing will win lots of elections and will deserve to.
All right, great stuff. Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor. Like I said, later on in the show, we're going to be having a chat about whether or not it's right that people say, oh, you know, young people, as Liam was saying, it's not correct, but young people, they spend too much money on a variety of different frivolous things. And back in my day, you know, house prices were this, that and the other. So we're going to be having a debate on that. But the number of hate crimes recorded by police has dropped for the first time in a decade. However, there has been an increase in complaints about religious and transgender hatred. Here's a breakdown of the stats for you. So, police in England and Wales recorded 145,214 offences in the 12 months to March 2023. That is down by 5% on the previous year. Almost 102,000 were race hate crimes. That's a fall of 6%. But there were more than 9,000 religious hate crimes, which is an increase of 9%, so a mixed bag here. And there was a total of 4,732 transgender hate crimes. That, of course, is now up 11%. So a variety of different offshoots here. How good a country is Britain to be transgender? How good a country is it to be an ethnic minority? What are the kind of religious pushbacks as well? So while the majority of offences reported to police were race hate crimes, of course, the number of complaints overall has fallen. And Kemi Badenoch told the Tory conference on Tuesday that the UK is the best country in the world to be black. She also criticised Labour.
They want young people to believe a narrative of hopelessness, a narrative that says there is no point in trying because British society is against you and you're better off asking for reparations. A narrative that tells children like mine that the odds are stacked against them. I tell my children that this is the best country in the world to be black because it is a country that sees people, not labels.
Well, there we go. I'm joined now by social policy analyst Dr. Rakib Ehsan. Dr. Rakib, thank you very, very much. So Britain is not a particularly hateful nation then, is it? Overall, hate crimes are down.
Well, I wouldn't say so. As you say, Patrick, hate crimes are down. Now, for particular types of hate crimes, there have been some increases and decreases of note. But I think if you're looking at Kemi Badenoch's speech, I fully agree with her. I think that this is something that I've said many times before on GB News, that we are a relatively successful multiracial democracy. We've seen that the race-related hate crimes, even though they make up the largest portion of hate crimes, are actually down from last year. I think in terms of religious hate crimes, you mentioned there, Patrick, there has been an increase.
Yeah.
And while I do argue that Britain is one of the best places to live as a religious minority, we should do more to tackle various forms of anti-Muslim prejudice and anti-Semitism. I also noticed, though, that I think 7% of the religious hate crimes were reported by people with the Christian identification as well. And I have been concerned by growing forms of anti-Christian sentiment sentiment, in my view, which is almost seen as a more acceptable form of discrimination. I don't think that's right at all. But the one point I think we should make, Patrick, is that we shouldn't conflate very real forms of hateful discrimination with perfectly legitimate criticisms of ideology. I think there is a fundamental difference between the two.
Well, exactly. So, yeah, I'll break this down. 39% of religious hate crime offences, that was towards Muslims, so Islamophobia, alleged Islamophobia. That was followed by alleged anti-Semitism, 17%. You've rightly said there, Christians make up 7%, and Hindus and Sikhs are both on 3% there. In 22% of the offences, apparently, the targeted religion was not known, so therefore I'm not entirely sure who the class
There's a lot of missing data there, yeah.
As a religious hate crime, but there we go. When it comes to this now, is there an argument that says maybe people are more inclined to, take a legitimate criticism of a religion if somebody says, something about a lack of integration, for example, or things like that, and say, this is a hate crime, I'm reporting you for a hate crime?
No, absolutely. And I think that, as I said before, we really need to get away from that dangerous conflation between perfectly legitimate criticisms of ideology, whether that's a particular religion, or indeed, we talked about it, you mentioned the increase in hate crimes towards transgender people. But I've also seen, and I think that trans people should be able to live a life free from harassment, intimidation, and violence, but equally criticising the very excesses of radical transgenderism, I don't think that's a form of discrimination. Indeed, that could be on the back of a fundamental defence of women's rights. So I think that we really need to understand that in a free and fair democracy such as ours, it is perfectly legitimate to criticise ideologies, and that is not necessarily a form of hateful discrimination.
No, absolutely not. And I think it's all too easy these days at times to be labelled a racist or a transphobe. You know, if a woman was stood queuing up for a public toilet and a bloke in a wig arrived and stood next to her and she said, look, I don't think you should be using this toilet, it would be very easy for that person to then report them for being a transphobe, when, I think in most people's views maybe they wouldn't be. But one thing that stood out for me, Ricky, was the demographics of Britain have changed massively. Every single year, by definition, we become a more multicultural, a more diverse society. Therefore, the number of ethnic minorities increases. And yet, here, we see hate crimes going down, which I think just shows that Britain is actually an incredibly welcoming place, and that there's no need for all this kind of national self-loathing that we seem to be teaching everyone.
Oh no, absolutely. I've said before, compared to major EU member states such as France, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, and Italy, post-Brexit Britain comfortably outperforms them when it comes to the provision of anti-discrimination protections on the grounds of race, ethnicity, and religion. We're home to some of the most strongest equality bodies in the world, Patrick. And as you know, we have a string of protected characteristics in existing equalities legislation. Now, of course, we shouldn't be overly complacent and give up the fight when it comes to tackling various forms of discrimination. But we also have to maintain our commitment to having a free democracy, a free liberal democracy, where ideologies are open to scrutiny and criticism.
At what point do you think it might be time to do away with things like affirmative action or positive discrimination? At what point do we go, right, looking at this...
Oh, Patrick, I don't even want to see that.
What was that?
I don't even want to see that. I don't even want to see that in Britain. I think that positive discrimination is an oxymoron, the most outrageous one in my view, Patrick. I think the emphasis has to be on equality of opportunity, whether that's in the labour market, education or housing. That needs to be the key. We need to focus on equality of opportunity, not equalisation of outcomes. And I think that if we were to introduce various forms of American-style affirmative action, a country with a very different history and environment when it comes to race relations, I think that could fundamentally destabilise social cohesion in modern Britain, and I don't want to see that at all.
No, I agree with you entirely, and you certainly look at the percentage of the population that are various different demographics and how well represented, in the vast majority of workplaces and certainly on our television screens, etc. You would have to look at it and go, well, is there much need for any more affirmative action? You could then go, oh, well, have a look at the hate crime stats. It doesn't appear that Britain is a nation full of frothing little racists and transphobes, does it? On that trans issue, though, yes, so trans hate is up by 11%, they say, to 4,732. Do we know much about how these figures are collated, though? So, for example, if I decided that I was now going to be Patricia and I thought that you didn't recognise me as a woman, and I said, Dr. Rakib Hassan has been transphobic towards me. And the police looked at it and they decided that there wasn't really much doing there. Would that still be recorded? Would that still be recorded stats? So do these stats include things where the police have decided to take no further action? Or have we seen 4,732 people in the last year prosecuted for trans hate crimes?
Well, I think that when you have to look at the figures, this is ultimately for hate-related crimes. Now, for me, I think that you raise a very good point here, Patrick, in terms of monitoring. For example, we've seen in recent years, and a number of British Jewish scholars have made this fantastic point, that when you look at levels of anti-Semitism in the UK, you also have to understand how we've changed our monitoring processes. Perhaps they've been improved, and that naturally leads to an increase in the rates of anti-Semitism. So I think that we need to have to look at how things are monitored. I think in terms of transgenderism, I make the very same point that people should be free to live their lives away from hateful discrimination. But I think that the police also, I think there have been some police forces that have been left wanting when it's come to approaching women who've expressed, in my view, perfectly legitimate gender-critical views.
Dr. Rakib, always a pleasure. Thank you very, very much. Dr. Rakib Hassan, social policy analyst, friend of the show. Right, I've just about got time to sneak in a little Patrick's pick of the day for you. And today, I'm looking at our old friends at Just Stop Oil. 5 people were arrested after protesters invaded the stage at a performance of Les Miserables yesterday evening. Here's what happened. There we go. Yeah, I do like the way that I think they should just let them carry on. Those shouty little idiots there. And they get booed as well. Good. Good. Here we go. We can hear it, can't we? Yeah. I think it's a good thing that they were booed, but also, who are they trying to convince? You've got theatre-going people, most people going to, watch the theatre on the West End. I would imagine they're possibly already quite sympathetic towards their cause. But a reminder of this hour's breaking news. A man who broke into Windsor Castle with a loaded crossbow to kill the late Queen has been sentenced to 9 years in jail. Jaswant Chail climbed into the castle grounds with the weapon and later declared that he was there to, quote, kill the Queen on Christmas Day in 2021. He also, for what it's worth, had some rather interesting interactions with an artificial intelligence chatbot, which I think needs looking at. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show, that's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find, actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's 4 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News. Now, Rishi Sunak has apparently managed to get some kind of deal on immigration with European nations. We will be telling you all about that very shortly and why it could well take this wind out of Labour's sails ahead of their party conference over the weekend and into next week. In other news, we're going to be talking about this. Do young people deserve to own homes? Should they be entitled to home ownership, perhaps in the way that some of the older generations were? Or do they spend too much money on things like going to Ibiza, eating avocados and drinking expensive, frothy coffee? I'll also be talking about this. Britain, is it a bad place to be trans, or is it too easy to be called a transphobe? The hate crime stats are out. It's good news for the vast majority of people, apart from, apparently, the trans community. What does all of this really mean? And Kevin Keegan has put the boot in. He's saying that he doesn't really like it when, and I'm quoting now, lady footballers come on and talk about the men's game. Has he got a point? Because when you see the women's games, you don't tend to get many male pundits. Or actually, is he an outdated, dangerous dinosaur? Patrick Christys, GB News. I'll get the emails coming in thick and fast on absolutely any one of those top topics. GBviews at gbnews.com. I'll be back with you ranting, frankly, about why I think we need to stop banning things in this country. I'm sick of us banning things, whether it's smoking, adverts, all sorts of statues. Stop banning things. GBviews at gbnews.com. But I'll be there after your headlines with Polly.
Patrick, thank you, and hello to you. Well, the main news today is that a man who broke into Windsor Castle armed with a loaded crossbow with the intention of killing the late Queen has been sentenced to 9 years in jail for treason. Jaswant Chail wandered around inside the grounds for 2 hours on Christmas Day in 2021 while the late Queen was in residence. The Old Bailey today heard he'd been encouraged by an artificial intelligence virtual girlfriend with which he'd exchanged thousands of messages. The judge said Chail was non-psychotic, though, and therefore culpable when he devised his plot, but had lost touch with reality and become psychotic by the time he carried it out. Commander Murphy from the Metropolitan Police Counter-Terrorism Unit says Chail had acted out of revenge for events in the past.
He was fixated on previous events that he put down to the British Empire in India. And as a result of his fixation on those events, he felt that killing the head of state in the UK would affect some kind of revenge for those historical events.
Now, the cost of renting a property has increased the highest level on record. The average charge for a place to live, excluding London, is now almost £1,300 a month, which is the 15th consecutive quarter that the record has been broken. It's worse still in the capital, with average rents rising to more than £2,600 a month. The research by property website Rightmove also shows that demand is much higher, with properties attracting 25 inquiries per property compared to just 8 before the pandemic. Property expert Russell Quirk says the rise was inevitable.
Supply, so the amount of rental properties available, has also dropped. So the numbers state that there's about 35% fewer properties available. So you've got demand up, supply down. There's only one inevitable consequence of that, which is that prices will increase significantly, as indeed they are.
The Prime Minister says he wants European leaders to unite and target people smugglers. Rishi Sunak is in Spain for the European Political Community Summit, where he'll be co-chairing talks with the Italian Prime Minister on the rising levels of illegal migration to Europe. The Prime Minister also spoke to Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, saying Europe must face down the threat from Russia. Here at home, the Transport Secretary says cancelling the northern leg of HS2 will allow for investments that fit the needs of the country. It's after the Prime Minister announced the northern section of the high-speed rail line had been scrapped in his speech yesterday at the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. The former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and David Cameron both criticised the decision, though, last night, saying that a once-in-a-generation opportunity had been lost. Mark Harper told GB News the facts, though, have changed.
Every penny that we save from cancelling that's £36 billion, and reinvesting every penny across the North, the Midlands and the rest of the country on important transport infrastructure that the people of this country want. So I think that's just changing what we're investing, still investing in transport, but having investments that fit the needs of the country and recognise the facts have changed about the costs of HS2.
The Scottish Government has signed an extradition order for a man accused of faking his own death to avoid prosecution. Nicholas Rossi is wanted in the United States for allegedly raping a woman in 2008. He was arrested in Glasgow in 2021, but claimed it was a case of mistaken identity and that he's an Irish orphan called Arthur Knight. After a long legal battle, he'll now be transported to the United States to face charges against him. Now, around 3,000 people have had to be evacuated from the Spanish island of Tenerife because of wildfires. The flames are being fuelled by strong winds and high temperatures, but authorities say efforts to bring the fires under control are going well. The area was hit by wildfires over the summer and thousands of tourists were forced to flee home. Temperatures are expected to reach close to 40 degrees there over the coming days as well. Here, Southern and Thames Water have been identified as standout poor performers by an industry watchdog. The Consumer Council for Water says more than 20 million people were being let down because the firms failed to deal with issues raised by their customers. Complaints to Southern Water were almost 3 times higher than the average for water and sewage companies. Now, 5 Just Stop Oil protesters arrested for interrupting a performance of Les Miserables last night are still in custody. Here's what happened. If you're listening on radio, we are looking at pictures of the protesters holding up banners marked Just Stop Oil. Police now are appealing for anyone with footage of the protest at the theatre in London's West End to get in touch. The activists had fixed themselves to the stage using flexible bike locks, forcing the production to end early. Refunds are being offered to angry theatregoers. The Princess of Wales has joined some of England's World Cup winning wheelchair rugby league squad. She got stuck in at the event in Hull, where she sat in a wheelchair herself and gave the game a go. Kate, who's patron of the Rugby Football League, is there to help promote inclusivity in sport. You're with GB News across the UK on your TV, in your car, on digital radio, and now on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Please, can we just stop banning things? When did we become a country that just bans stuff all the time? Smoking. Now, I know most people aren't smokers and most people don't like the smell. I know it's unhealthy, but banning it to the point where at some stage in the future, A 40-year-old man is going to be hanging around outside a corner shop in Basingstoke asking a 41-year-old man if he can go in and illegally get him a packet of Marlboro Golds is farcical. It's like banning cocaine or weed. That hasn't really worked out that well, has it? The toilet cubicles in Soho look like Frosty the Snowman has just stormed through there, and everywhere you go, the streets smell like an Amsterdam coffee shop. Apparently, banning smoking could leave something like an £8 billion gap in tax revenue as well. How are we going to make that back up? Statues. We're essentially banning statues. There were calls for so-called contested statues to be removed. Now we've reached a compromise where those statues have to have a little explainer on them to say that this person might actually be a bit of a pillock and you maybe should hate them because during the 1800s, they dared to have the same views as everybody else. Ridiculous. Adverts. Junk food adverts are banned from the London Underground, probably other places as well. This, by the way, includes cheese. An advert for artisanal cheese was banned for promoting an unhealthy lifestyle. I mean, gosh, when did artisanal cheese pose a threat to the fabric of British society? If we're banning adverts promoting an unhealthy lifestyle, surely we then have to ban all those fashion adverts with plus-size models. By the way, I don't think we should do that. And yes, big can sometimes be beautiful, but not very often. And showing off a body that's got more rolls than a bakery is hardly promoting healthy eating now, is it? Cars. Ban cars. Drive slower. Drive so slowly it'll be easier for you to ride a bike 30 miles to work. Drive through so many different ULEZ and clean air zones that you won't be able to afford to drive anymore. Ban it, ban it, ban it. This is just the slow creep of totalitarianism. Seriously, I know it might seem a bit funny, but there are some very serious undertones to this desire for authoritarian behaviour. Who has the right to ban a consenting adult from looking at a slice of cheese in an advert? Or smoking? Who is making these rules? Why do they think that they know better? Get out of my life. Very often, politicians struggle to run their own lives, so stop telling me how to run mine. Knife crime and shoplifting are banned, by the way. How are they getting on at managing those things? But there is another point here as well. It infantilises people. Oh, I took one look at that statue of a slave owner, and now all of a sudden I've got 50 slaves. I mean, it just doesn't happen, does it? People need to be strongly encouraged not to drive, do they? No. Maybe you live in an area with terrible public transport, there's 3 kids there who need to go to school, and you've got to be at work at 9 a.m, so you've made the adult decision that driving is the best option for you. I mean, is it any wonder that we have a generation coming through who are totally helpless and offended by everything they see? Oh, please, shield our eyes from that picture of Winston Churchill. I saw an advert for a burger on a billboard and I had to go out and eat so much junk food that I gave myself diabetes. Grow up. Stop treating us like children who need to be sheltered. Stop telling us all things need to be banned for our own good. Get out of our lives, you authoritarian little control freaks. In case you couldn't tell, I've just given up smoking. Right, OK, email me, gbviews@gbnews.com. I'll have more on that topic a little bit later on in the show. But before we get to that, the latest on the migrant crisis, let me bring you some breaking news. So, prosecutors have concluded there is no realistic prospect of conviction for 21 people arrested on the day of the King's coronation to prevent a breach of the peace, and they will face no further action. The groups were arrested in order to prevent a breach of the peace and on suspicion of conspiracy to cause a public nuisance on the Mall in Whitehall, I should say, on the morning of the coronation back in May. Much controversy about that. Now the police have said they don't expect there being any realistic opportunity for prosecution. So there we go. Now, to the big news, to battle the migrant crisis. Britain is about to sign a deal that will give us access to EU intelligence. More than 25,000 migrants across the Channel this year, but a deal with the Frontex border agency could be confirmed next week. It will mean that Border Force officials will be able to keep track of migrant movements and people smuggling across Europe. Before we have a debate on this, I've got GB News' very own political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, thank you very much. Is this a win for Sunak or a capitulation to the Remainers?
I can tell you hot news, Patrick, that in meetings with the leaders, the counterparts of Rishi Sunak with Germany, Albania and Ireland, migration has come up throughout. This meeting, of course, is over in Granada in Spain. It's a European political community established by President Macron in October 2022 after the invasion of Ukraine. It's 47 countries, the EU 28 plus more countries and smaller ones, and the UK, of course, on top of that. But we are hearing from number 10 that illegal migration has come up. The mood music in Europe is changing, is what they're saying, that there's more of a common cause between the UK and the continental Europe about dealing with the flow of migrants coming towards the whole continent. So what's fascinating is hearing how the UK government is now trying to work closer with its counterparts on the continent to tackle migration.
And also, presumably, they are more willing to work closer with us. There is now a continental recognition that the migrant crisis is actually a problem.
There's common cause. Keir Starmer tapped into that when he went over to Paris. Of course, GBNews was there outside where the meeting took place. He had half an hour with Emmanuel Macron. They discussed Brexit, we know that for sure. Almost certainly discuss joint approaches on small boats and migration. They do see it as a common cause issue. The difference between the Tories and Labour Party is the Tories' Rwanda plan is in the Supreme Court next week. If that is approved, that could be a game changer if what happens, as they say, what happens.
Christopher Hope, there, GBNews' political editor, with the hot off the press news. So the government is close to confirming this new deal. It hopes it will help solve the migrant crisis. The question is, of course, has this taken the wind out of Labour's sails? Because, as we were hearing, Sir Keir Starmer and Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper held talks in the Netherlands last month. He said that a Labour government would set up a new police unit to tackle illegal migration, and he suggested that he was open to a returns agreement for asylum seekers with the European Union, which caused a huge amount of controversy and led to a lot of other Labour politicians following Keir Starmer around with a big mop and a bucket, saying he didn't really mean any of that. I'm joined now for this by former Labour Minister Dennis McShane and the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. No doubt a stellar debate awaits. Dennis, I will start with you. So Rishi Sunak has outmanoeuvred Keir Starmer here, hasn't he? Taken the wind out of his sails and actually could well end up getting to grips with the migrant crisis.
Excuse me, we've just decided to go back to where we were in 2016, when we were part of Frontex and we had access to all this information. Boris Johnson, David Frost's ultra-hard Brexit deal cut it off, and Rishi Sunak, very sensibly, like on Horizon, like on a number of other issues, is trying to get back, not into bed, but at least sit on the side of the bed with the rest of Europe. It's a good idea. It's nothing. It's not going to make much difference, to be honest.
Right, OK. Richard, I'll put that to you as the leader of Reform UK. Is this a capitulation to the Remainers? They were right all along, were they?
No, not at all. Look, come on, it'll make no difference at all. Patrick, in your monologue, you talked about not wanting to ban things. Actually, you're wrong, Patrick. The one thing the whole country does want to ban is illegal migration, which is completely out of control. And let me tell you, all of these warm words going on in Granada between various leaders will make not a jot of difference whatsoever, because we know the only thing that works is what worked in Australia. You pick up and you take back, which you're entitled to do under international treaty law. Otherwise, nothing will happen, nothing will change. Suella Braverman talked about a hurricane of migration coming across from Africa and other nations. And this hurricane will blow like a brutal, brutal storm until we lead the way, we pick up, we take back to France, and then the EU leaders learn from our leadership, learn from our lesson, and do exactly the same across the Mediterranean. At that moment, they're stopped. Then you can get to grips with the causes of illegal migration in Africa and other nations.
All right, Dennis, for years, Britain was more worried about illegal migration than our continental friends, and now, after we've left, they finally decided to take it seriously.
Excuse me, talk to Marine Le Pen, talk to Matteo Salvini. How many names do you want me to read out of European politicians who sound just like Richard, just like Nigel, about immigration? Now, Richard's idea, yes, if the nearest island to us was about 1,000 sea miles away, and little boats came, we could intervene them 500-600 miles away in open waters and put them on another island. They're not sent back. You're not going to get France sort of taking, with the Royal Navy, with our aircraft carriers that don't even have airplanes on them now, taking back these migrants into France.
Dear Dennis.
I'm sorry, Richard. I mean, you just don't know the law, the facts. You've not been on the ground. No, you sit there coming up with your instant solutions.
Dennis. All right, Dennis. So, Richard, do you know the law?
I do know the law. I've read the treaties. I know exactly which clauses. And it's the only way you're going to stop this crisis. Dennis, it's the 1974 Safety of Life at Sea. Dennis, it's the 1982 UN Convention on the Law at Sea. I suggest you read them, get a lawyer, Dennis, and then you'll know that I'm right. And then you can come on and apologise.
I think you might have done you there, Dennis.
No, you want me to apologise to Richard? I mean, come on, he and I don't apologise to each other. We're friends.
You're wrong about that,
I mean, he's just... You know, if it was that easy, Richard, why do you think the Italians don't do it? They're much more obsessed.
We've got
No, then let me finish. I let you
finish.
finish. I let you finish, Richard. Every country in Europe's going bonkers about this at the moment. Germany is closing or threatening to close its frontiers with Poland. The French Interior Minister says it won't take a single immigrant from Italy, closing frontiers with Italy. Right. The numbers are huge there, and if it was that easy, tough people like Maloney, I can name others, would have done it a long time ago. It just is a dream to pretend there's a magic solution.
Go on.
It's not a dream. It was done in Australia, Patrick and Dennis. You know that.
We're back to the 1,000 miles problem, Richard.
All right, Dennis. OK. So, Richard, so as far as you're concerned, then, in terms of sharing intelligence with Frontex and the EU nations, etc., will that not at least have some benefit when it comes to tackling these human smuggling gangs?
Patrick, we've sent them nearly £500 million, and it's making no difference whatsoever. Well over 25,000 have come over this year and continuing to come. Hundreds and hundreds of thousands are coming across the Mediterranean. None of this makes any difference until you actually have a proper deterrent, show some proper, courageous, bold leadership like Tony Abbott did 10 years ago in Australia, and it stopped immediately.
So, Dennis, let's say that we, by the way, it looks like no matter which party ends up winning the next general election, we're going to do whatever it is that Rishi Sunak's about to sign, some kind of deal with Frontex, intelligence sharing, etc., and a more continental-wide approach to tackling migration. So that looks like that's about to happen almost definitely. If that doesn't work, Dennis, then what do we do? Then our only option would be to turn back the boats, wouldn't it? Then your beloved EU wouldn't have helped us.
Not a question, my beloved EU. We're going to go back to what we had before. You have a number of colleagues who've served in the immigration service on your show, different GBNews shows, and they all agree. If any, these actually are the professionals, and they tear their hair out because there's such mass people movement, and it's literally unstoppable with sort of fantasies that we've got.
Well, what's stopping it? Well, so you don't think this? So the one point of agreement between both of you, as far as I can gather, is that neither of you think this is going to work, Dennis.
Well, I think what we started to do with the French cops now, with very sharp knives and axes, the moment they see any of these Zodiacs, they just cut them up. But we're talking about 1,000 kilometres.
Can I clarify, he's talking about the boats there?
It's 1,000-kilometre long coastline. Rommel had the biggest army in Europe, and he couldn't stop the invaders arriving in June 1944. We just have to grow up. There are reasons to sort out why so many people come, why William Hague and David Cameron created failed states in Libya and Syria, Tony Blair in Iraq and Afghanistan. Look into a little bit of that, but we'll have to do it cooperate. Let some of the people work here. There's plenty of jobs for them. That works in Sweden, in Germany. The Italians are going to...
It doesn't work in Sweden. Absolute nonsense. That's why Sweden's just elected a right-of-centre party in order to stop it, because they've got crime that's going through the roof through illegal migration and indeed through legal migration. So actually, that's just proven you wrong again, Dennis. You've had a bad afternoon.
Just final word, Richard. Final words, Richard. Look, the fact is, this will be dressed up as, we should never have left the European Union. Look at us now. We are going to have conversations with them, and we're going to get back involved with the kind of thing that we were in whilst we were in the European Union. That is how this will be sold, Richard, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, frankly, we've left the European Union and the British people won't buy it. The only thing the British people will buy is when the boats stop, Patrick. It's as simple as that. We hear all these words. We heard nothing about the European Convention on Human Rights from either the Home Secretary or the Prime Minister at the Tory conference.
All right, look, both of you, thank you very much. Good stuff, proper debate. You love to see it. It's former Labour Minister Dennis McShane and the leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, also of this parish. Now, rental costs have gone up again, but would you believe that they've increased by more than 10% in just a year? However, I'm asking this. Is it right that young people should even feel entitled to own a property? Or is it just a pipe dream and they should work harder? Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks. whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
.426, you're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. In a few minutes, the number of transgender hate crimes recorded by the police increases by 11%. Ask whether the UK is a bad place to be a trans person or whether people are becoming more easily offended. Now, rent across the country have risen to record highs for the 15th month running, with the market seeing increases of around 10% in the past 12 months. That is according to the property portal Rightmove. And it raises all of those questions, doesn't it, about whether or not young people have any right to moan about housing, buying a house, etc. Here to break down the numbers is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Loads of other countries rent, don't they? Like Germany, I think it's a lot more common than it is over here. I mean, is this just a ridiculous British home ownership aspiration, do you think?
No, I don't think so. Germany has much cheaper homes to rent and to buy because Germany has a lot more homes than we have. Germany has about 550 homes, Patrick, for every 1,000 people. We have less than 400. France has 520. We have less than 400. That's why the cost of housing in this country is so high. Whether you're trying to rent or buy, we usually focus on buying, don't we? But we're going to focus on renting in this little section. And that's why young people are finding it so difficult, because in recent decades, the rate of home building, both for rent and buy, has slowed down so much. and that's why prices have gone up so much more than wages. Let's have a look at these numbers from Rightmove.
Yeah.
Came out early this morning. So the average UK rent, hold on to your hat, is £1,278 a month now. That's 10% up on this time last year. That's obviously a huge increase. And the average rent in London is £2,627 a month. That's 12% up on last year. This is because there aren't enough homes, and that's why the amount of time you have to spend looking for a home, the competition to get a rental is going up. The average rental, says Rightmove, attracts 25 inquiries now. Each, emails or viewings or phone calls to the agent. That's 3 times more than last year. It was eight inquiries this time last year. And the hottest rental market, it's not actually in London. It's barely in the southeast. It's in Luton, which is in Bedfordshire, about 30 miles north of London. But you've also had rent rises in a single year of 20% plus on average in Loughborough in the Midlands, in Preston in the northwest, of course, in Edinburgh and in Paisley in Scotland. So look, rents are much higher in the capital, but they're going up pretty fast outside the capital too.
OK, and you don't think it's fair. As you will know, we get a load of emails in from people, and I've had quite a few during this show that said, I'll paraphrase one of them, that said her and her husband were in their early 30s, had to scrimp and save, they had one car, they were renting, they couldn't afford to buy, and over a period, they didn't have kids, over the period when it got to their late 30s, they finally, after not going on holidays and doing all of those things, were in a position where they could get a mortgage. And, I do see a lot of people in their early 20s who I know are out and about all the time, going on 2 or 3 foreign holidays a year, who, rooftop bars, drinking cocktails, who then complain that they can't afford a house or they haven't got any savings.
Well, I'm not here to be fair or unfair. I'm here to tell you what the facts are. And the facts are that when I bought my first house in the late 90s, the average home in this country was about 4 times the price of the average annual income, right? The average home in this country is now almost 10 times the average annual income. So today's generation of youngsters are having to pay much, much, much higher house prices to buy a house and indeed to rent a house than my generation were, even though interest rates now are lower because the houses themselves are so much more expensive. So yes, when I bought my first house, interest rates were up at sort of 10% But because the house was less, the mortgage could be much less, I ended up paying a lower share of my income in payments to service that mortgage, even at 10%, than a youngster would pay to service a mortgage now at 4%, 5% or 6%, because their mortgage is so much bigger because the house is more expensive. But this is intergenerational, and it's interesting, Patrick, at the Tory conference, there were lots and lots of young people, which isn't something you always see at a Tory conference. A lot of the housing fringe meetings that I spoke at, half the room was youngsters, people from groups like YIMBY. They're not No In My Backyard, the NIMBYs. They're the YIMBYs, Yes In My Backyard. And there are YIMBY movements all over the UK, all over the Western world, Europe and in particular America, because youngsters are now really angry that they can't buy a home. And my concern is, if it's really hard to rent, if it's really hard to buy, this is messing with our demography.
It is.
And that's what turns, in the end, unfortunately, makes politics more extreme, because people go for, idiot policies that have been proven to fail, like rent controls and so on. So I'm hoping we can avoid those. Because the evidence against them is very strong.
Interesting, isn't it? Long-term decision-making for a brighter future, or whatever it was, that slogan.
That was the Tory slogan,
Not to say anything about housing.
Yeah, it was a big miss.
It's not just a looming crisis, it's here. But anyway, Liam.
Let's see if Labour do better in Liverpool.
That will be interesting. Liam, thank you very much. Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor. Right, OK, loads to come between now and 5 o'clock. I will discuss controversial comments by football legend Kevin Keegan. He says that women aren't qualified to give their views about men's football. Or something like that, anyway. Has he got a point, or is he outdated? Now, it's your headlines with Polly Middlehurst.
Patrick, thank you. The headlines this hour: a man who broke into Windsor Castle armed with a loaded crossbow in order to kill the late Queen has been sentenced to 9 years in jail for treason. Jaswant Singh Chail was found in the grounds on Christmas Day in 2021 while the late Queen was in residence. The judge said Chail was culpable when he devised his plot, but had lost touch with reality and become psychotic by the time he carried it out. In separate news today, at least 51 people have died after a Russian missile hit a cafe in northeastern Ukraine. It's reported the victims were holding a memorial service at the time, and Ukrainian officials are calling it a heinous crime. And some breaking news we're receiving within the last few minutes or so. The driver that was involved in the Wirral bus accident suffered what's being described as an event at the wheel before the school bus crash, which killed him and a 15-year-old. A coroner's court has been hearing today. CCTV footage from inside the coach shows the driver, David Shrimpton, slumped to the left whilst he's driving. 54 people were on the bus when it crashed last Friday. That news just into us. More on all those stories by heading to our website, of course, as ever, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And looking at a quick snapshot of today's markets for you, the pound will buy you $1.2160 and 1.1552 euros. The price of gold, £1,495 and 68 pence an ounce. The FTSE 100 currently standing at 7,450 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
The number of hate crimes recorded by police has dropped for the first time in a decade. However, there's been an increase in complaints about religious and transgender hate. Here's a breakdown of the stats. So, police in England and Wales recorded 145,214 offences in the 12 months to March 2023. That is down by 5% on the previous year. Almost 102,000 were race hate crimes. That's a fall as well of 6%. So we're doing well so far, aren't we? But there were more than 9,000 religious hate crimes, which is an increase of 9%. There was also a total of 4,732 transgender hate crimes. That is apparently up by 11%. So I'm going to zone in on those ones now and just ask, is Britain a bad place to be trans? I'm joined now by the transgender teacher and journalist Debbie Hayton and trans rights campaigner and the host of Gender Nebulous podcast, Frida Wallace. Thank you very, very much, both of you. Frida, is Britain a bad place to be trans, then?
In my experience, no, I don't think so. I mean, I get out and about quite a lot. I was at the Tory Party conference last few days ago, and I just milled around there. No, it doesn't seem to be a problem for me. But the thing is, what I notice is transgender topics are very much key in the media. There aren't no more transgender people, but we are being talked about a lot more. So people are asked to have opinions on us more. And obviously a lot of the people, they don't really understand the issue. They don't know why people are transgender. There's lots of reasons why somebody might come out at a different time in their life as trans. But for me personally, I've just noticed there's a lot more talk about it in the media. So people are obviously more opinionated on me. So they might not know me personally, but they've got an opinion on me. So I find myself being talked about quite a lot, but no representation.
But they're not, I suppose they're not hate crimes, though, are they, is the thing? I mean, it's just a discussion, isn't it? I think, Debbie, it's on that I'll just come to you now. Do you recognise this so-called 11% rise in hate crimes, do you think, towards trans people?
No, I go about my life as I've always done. I'm not looking for transgender hate around the next corner, and I don't find it. It's just not lurking there. I think the question is just what on earth do these figures represent? Because they're reports of transgender hate crime, and practically anything can be reported. Somebody looked at me a bit funny on the bus. I was a bit uncertain about this. So we need to look at what actually is being reported. And for example, some years ago, there was a sticker campaign. Some women were putting up stickers which said woman, adult, human, female. And we were told within the transgender community that this should be reported and logged with the police online hate crime form because we need the stats. You know, if you go looking for the stats, you can find them.
OK, Frida, are sometimes maybe people within the trans community a bit too sensitive?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the thing that Debbie's referring to there, the stickers saying how do you move female, they come from a very specific place. They're coming from Kerry J. Keane, who we know is an anti-trans campaigner. That's not in dispute. And I think it's right that people call that. They're not trying to get arrested. They're just making sure that the
I'm just going to push just on that, because I actually think this pushback ties in a little bit maybe with some of the points you made earlier, Frida, which is, OK, Kelly J. Keane probably wouldn't describe herself as an anti-trans campaigner. She would, I think, really describe herself as a women's rights activist. And what she would... Well, I kind of beg to differ, because what I think she's saying, well, I know she's saying, is we don't... What does she... OK, let me finish, and then I'll ask you a question, and then we can have the answer, right? So what she would say is we don't want men in women's spaces. That's her big thing. But, I mean, is that transphobic, really?
No, but what she's actually saying there is she's saying trans people. She's not, when she says men, she's referring to someone like me who just goes about my daily life. Now, if I went into a public toilet and Kelly J. Keane was there, I'd be scared to death. Do you know what I mean? I understand what you're saying, Patrick, that this, there is a conversation to be had about single-sex spaces and all that, but it can't come from people like Kelly J. Keane, who we know are transphobic. It's got to come from people who actually look at the statistics.
All right, I'll just say again. Look, obviously Kelly's not here to defend herself. I would imagine she would deny that she was transphobic. Yeah, go on.
Let's do it based on risk assessment.
Let's do what? Sorry, what based on risk assessment?
You're going to create this issue that trans people are a problem in society, because that's what Kelly J. Keane would say. But where is the risk? What is the risk?
Okay. Well, I mean, she will point to numerous different articles there where people. Well, yeah, but they do exist, right? Where people who are members of the trans community have committed crimes, and she will point to those and say that is a demonstrable fact why men or trans women shouldn't be in female spaces, and that is up to her. The only reason I'm going to veer away from Kelly J. Keane is because we are now having a discussion about a woman who isn't here, and also it's not my job to defend her wholesale and all that stuff. So we'll move on. All right. Okay. Right. Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Fair enough. Debbie. Right. Gosh. So do you think then that I'll ask the same kind of question to you then? Do you think that maybe in some situations people are too quick to lob out the idea of that was transphobic for saying things like, I don't want someone with male genitalia in a female prison, say?
Well, I think that's a perfectly reasonable statement, that people with male genitalia shouldn't be in female prisons. And it's that sort of conversation that we need to have so we can build good policy that works for everybody. But the problem is, as soon as people start making those statements, then out come the claims of transphobia, and we just clock up the instances of transphobic hate. Whereas in reality, we need to be having this discussion, and we need to be talking about these issues. And it doesn't help trans people to be under the impression that transphobic hate is going through the roof. We need to get out there, do our jobs, and play our part in society, as I do, and I'd encourage other people to do. The world's a great place the country's a great place to live in.
And Frida, there are pretty much entire continents where it's much worse to be trans than it is here.
But we don't judge. I mean, the continents on the countries where it is better to be trans is where they have self-ID. We see people are happier overall. There's less misogynistic hate crime as well, because those are more progressive societies. That's why self-ID will come in. But what I will say is, if you want to look at hate crimes because for me it mainly happens on Twitter, to be honest, or X as it's known now. So if this video goes out, Patrick, onto Twitter, you have a look at the comments under this video. Just me being trans in a space like GBNews will cause a lot of people to have an opinion on me.
I do. By the way, I do see some of those comments, similar comments that happen at sometimes, and you are right that there are people who comment underneath tweets like that when this inevitably goes out that will say things like. So you are absolutely right. I must say I have also seen an incredible amount of hate, often mobilised, not just here, but people in America especially seem to jump on board when people say, I think a woman is a woman and a man is a man. And I've got to be honest with you, I have seen firsthand some incredibly vile and disgusting, threatening stuff on both sides of this discussion. Right? I really have seen that firsthand. So go on, Frida, I can see you.
It's not really a both sides discussion, because transgender people are a minority within a minority of the LGBT spectrum. But So if you start saying it's a both sides, you've got, I mean, online people are very, very militant sometimes, and I do accept that there are probably what you might call trans rights activists who will spew all kinds. But they're angry for a very good reason. We see our rights being removed, especially in America.
That's good. That's it. That's good. Right, that's good. That's a good point. So, Debbie, are trans rights being removed?
No, they're not being removed at all. I would take issue if Frida's only one side of this. There is only one side of this debate that's tried to get me sacked from work, and it's not gender critical women. So I think we need to step back and look at what is actually happening here, and think we need to have an adult conversation to develop good policy that works for everybody.
Okay, both. Go on, Frida, final word. Then go on.
I was going to say, people have campaigned to have me removed from my job. When I've been on TV, people say, don't put this person on the telly, because they know I can have the argument. They don't want people on the telly like me who can have a reasonable discussion. They want me to be a trans rights activist and fulfill that role of being angry all the time, but I'm not. And I'm happy to have this conversation with you, Patrick, because even though I do disagree with a lot of what you say sometimes, I mean, I do watch this because I don't live in an echo chamber, and me and Debbie have fallen out before, but we don't, you know, I respect that she's a human being. Do you know what I mean? We do. Trans people don't agree with each other. Do you know what I mean? So.
No, it's not one homogenous group, and I would say as well, Debbie, I'd be keen to get your view on this for the very final word before I get shouted at and taken off air. But this idea of pigeonholing people. I think has mainly been a construct, I would argue, of progressives, right? Everything's got to have a label, everything's got to have a flag attached to it, everything's got to have this, that and the other. And so is it not quite easy to group people in together? Debbie?
Well, it is, and this happens. And I don't think it's helpful to group these people together as trans people. I'm Debbie Hayton. I'm a teacher. I'm a trade unionist. I do a bit of writing in the press. The fact that I happen to have a curious psychological condition, you know, let's leave that to one side.
Yeah. All right. Okay. But all right, both of you, thank you. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, actually, and I'm sure most of our viewers and listeners will have done as well. Great stuff. Okay, so that is indeed teacher, journalist Debbie Hayton, and trans rights campaigner and the host of Gender Nebulous podcast, Frida Wallace. Right, so anyway, moving on. The former England manager Kevin Keegan, from one controversy to another, former England manager Kevin Keegan has said that he doesn't like listening to women talking about men's football. Is that a sexist view? Does he have a point? Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel, another minefield.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 10 to 5. You're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. At 5, I will look at the UK's new migrant agreement with the European Border Agency. But before that, former England manager Kevin Keegan has revealed that he doesn't like listening to women talking about men's football. So according to The Times, Keegan said, I don't like to listen to ladies talking about the England men's team at the match because I don't think it's the same experience. I have a problem with that. If I see an England lady footballer saying about England against Scotland at Wembley, and she's saying, if I would have been in that position, I would have done this, I don't think it's quite the same. I don't think it crosses over that much. OK, interesting. Well, I mean, has he got a point? Do you actually like female punditry on the men's games? Have you got a problem with whenever it's, say, the Women's World Cup or something along those lines? It does seem to be only women on those panels, whereas when the men's game is going on, you have women involved. I don't know, what do you think? I'm joined now by former referee and FIFA official, Janie Frampton. Janie, thank you. What do you reckon to Kevin Keegan then? Outdated dinosaur or got a point?
I think the conversation could almost end at outdated dinosaur.
Right.
And I think to start with, he shouldn't use the terminology ladies. They're women. So we don't refer to men as gentlemen, we refer to them as men. So that's the first point. The second point is we never complained when men were commentating on the women's game and saying that it's a different game, so how can they possibly know? So why are we genderfying both aspects? We've got some amazing women that commentate. And I have to say, there's a couple that their voice annoys me, but that's not them being women. It's because they talk too quickly or they're monotone, and that would be the same as if they were men. So you don't have to genderfy it.
OK.
So that's my issue.
Do you not think that maybe a lot of men do prefer a male pundit on men's football, though? And is that a problem for you?
Yeah, I think it's probably what they've been used to. You know, and historically, it always was men. Look at what happened in 2007 when Jackie Oatley commentated on Match of the Day. She was trolled. She was vilified. She absolutely went through so much. We're 16 years later, so why are we still having this conversation?
Is there an argument? Well, yeah. Would there be an argument that says that when you watch some football punditry, you might learn more from, say, a man who's won the World Cup and the Euros and 4 Champions Leagues, now however many La Ligas or Premier League titles, than a female footballer who maybe hasn't done those things? Is there any question over just the calibre of the pundit, do you think, or is that not relevant?
No, I don't think it's relevant. Some of these women have got over 100 caps for their country, regardless of the amount of games they've played for their clubs. You look at Sue Smith. You look at her on Gillette Soccer Special on a Saturday afternoon. Sorry for the blast there, but she's brilliant. And she sits alongside her male colleagues and she talks a lot of sense, whether it's positional play or tactical play. She's brilliant. You've only got to look at Alex Scott and a few others. I think we've got to realise the way forward is we take away the gender and we look at if the person is good enough to do that job.
OK, and just one final one with you. I mean, apparently Alex Scott's viewing figures, I believe, on Football Focus. I mean, Dan Walker, a former colleague, of course, decided that he was going to point that out kind of politely, but we all know what he really meant. I mean, is there an argument to say that the market has decided that they do just prefer male pundits?
Well, they may or they may not. You know, that is not for me to really comment on, because I think Alex Scott does very well whenever she comes across on commentary. I think some of the men come across very well. But, you know, also, I sit there sometimes and listen to men on the radio and the TV, and it's like a lad's chat in a pub. I have to switch it off sometimes.
Yeah, look,
but
to be honest,
make it a big issue.
No, fair enough. Janie, look, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this conversation. I hope to... Well, I kind of hope I don't have it again soon, because that would imply that someone else has piped up with something else. But there we go. Janie Frampton there, of course, a former referee and FIFA official. What do you make of that? I want to know your views on whether or not you think Kevin Keegan's got a point or not. gbviews@gbnews.com. I'll get to them in the next hour. But there is some big news in the battle to solve the migrant crisis. Britain is about to sign a deal that will give us access to EU intelligence. Some people are saying this actually won't make the blind bit of difference unless we turn the boat back. Other people are saying, look, we should have never left the EU in the first place. Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Aidan McKibben here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Big contrasts north to south across the country over the next few days. Mostly fine in the south and increasingly warm, but it's cloudier, it's breezier and it's wetter further north. Certainly the case for the rest of Thursday. We've got low pressure sitting to the northwest of Scotland. Weather fronts pushing in. Those weather fronts bringing some persistent rain, especially for the higher parts of Wales, northern England and Scotland. Spells of rain elsewhere across the northern two-thirds of the UK, but for southern counties of Wales, southern England, it's mostly dry as we end Thursday and go into Friday. A lot of cloud remaining, still breezy overnight, and as a result, it's a mild night virtually everywhere. Now, one band of rain clears the Northern Isles first thing on Friday. Another band of rain pushes some persistent wet weather into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland, northern England, North Wales. Either side of that, some brightness. Quite a strong wind blowing across the north of Scotland with the risk of gales. Less breezy further south, where it's going to be a warmer day for southern England and South Wales. Temperatures into the low 20s. Turning even warmer here over the coming days into the weekend. Temperatures up into the mid-20s possible, but it's increasingly wet for Scotland, especially Western Scotland, especially higher parts where there's the risk of more than 100 millimetres of rain building up. So that north-south contrast remains into the weekend.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political budgets.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us. From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's 5 p.m, it's Patrick Christys, it's GB News, bumper final hour of the show coming your way. Here we go. So, EU immigration deal. Is it right that Rishi Sunak is about to sign a deal that, frankly, leaves a lot of people wondering why we bothered to leave the European Union in the first place? In other news, I'll be discussing this as well. Yes, stop banning things, all right? Please, can we stop banning things? It's smoking, whether it's statues, whether it's going to be cars at some point, isn't it? Can we just stop it? Adverts for junk food. Why are we banning all of these things? Stop treating us like children. In other news, rant over with, do the young people deserve homes, okay? Or actually, should they just be happy to rent? Is it because they're all out there spending money on avocado and booze and other naughty things like that, holidays, when in reality, the older generation, they scrimped and saved and they worked very hard and then they got on the property ladder. The young people need to grow up a bit. Also, I'll be discussing this as well. Hate crimes are down overall, so it's not really hateful Britain, despite what you might be reading in some of the press. So I've got all that coming your way and much, much more right here on GB News. Have I got one more for you as well? I think I do. Yes, I do. The Style High Club. How could I forget coming up with this zinger? So British Airways have now got a new uniform which is causing a massive hoo-ha, okay? A gender-neutral uniform. So there we go. Patrick Christys, GB News. Not sure Style High Club is my finest work there, but anyway, get your emails coming in, gbviews@gbnews.com. Yeah, talk to me about the young people. Do you think they are overly entitled when it comes to home ownership? It's because Rishi Sunak didn't mention anything about housing in his conference speech, and now he's absolutely copying it. gbviews@gbnews.com, but it's your headlines with Polly first.
Patrick, thank you. Good evening to you. Well, our top story from the GB newsroom is that a man who broke into Windsor Castle armed with a loaded crossbow with an intention to kill the late Queen has been sentenced to 9 years in jail for treason. Jaswant Chail wandered around inside the grounds for 2 hours on Christmas Day 2021 while the late Queen was in residence. The Old Bailey today heard he'd been encouraged by an artificial intelligence virtual girlfriend with which he'd exchanged thousands of messages. The judge said Chail was non-psychotic and therefore culpable when he devised his plot, but had lost touch with reality and become psychotic by the time he carried it out. Sir Justice Hilliard delivered the sentencing. Now, in other news today, the coach driver in the Wirral bus crash has been described as having suffered an event at the wheel before the incident, which killed both him and a 15-year-old girl. A coroner's court has been hearing today. CCTV footage from inside the cab of the coach showed the driver, David Shrimpton, slumped to the left while he was driving. 54 people were on board the bus when it overturned on the M53 last Friday. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has revealed an extra 700,000 urgent dental appointments would be introduced under Labour in plans to improve the nation's oral health. The party would also introduce supervised toothbrushing, they're calling it, in schools across England in order to tackle what they're calling preventable tooth decay in children. People in most need of treatments, including fillings and root canal work, would be prioritised as well under proposals aimed at rescuing NHS dentistry. The plans would be backed by a £111 million a year package, which Labour said would come from abolishing non-domiciled tax status. Keir says Labour wants to target areas where people can't get a dentist appointment.
Too many places across the country, there's a desert where you can't get an NHS dentist, so we also have a scheme in place to ensure that we get newly qualified dentists into those areas. So that's the immediate fix, but obviously in the longer term we need to do preventative measures. So the third limb of this is toothbrushing at schools where we've got the biggest problems in our breakfast clubs, to make sure that children are brushing in the right way and therefore we prevent some of the problems.
The cost of renting a property has increased to the highest level on record. The average charge for a place to live, excluding London, is now almost £1,300 a month, which is the 15th consecutive quarter that the record has been broken. And it's worse still in the capital, with average rents rising to more than £2,600 a month. The research by property website Rightmove also shows that demand is higher, with 25 inquiries per dwelling, compared to just 8 before the pandemic. The Prime Minister says he wants European leaders to unite and target people smugglers. Rishi Sunak is in Spain for the European Political Community Summit, where he's going to be chairing talks with the Italian Prime Minister on the problem. Well, the problem of migration was also spoken about, and so was the war in Ukraine. The Prime Minister met with Ukraine's President, Volodymyr Zelensky, saying Europe must face down the threat from Russia. The Transport Secretary says cancelling the northern leg of HS2 will allow for investments that need to fit the needs of the country. Our apologies for the wrong vision there. If you're watching on television, we'll get that sorted out for you. Well, let me tell you once again about the cancelling of the northern leg of HS2, which was announced at Tory party conference yesterday in the Prime Minister's speech. Well, the Transport Secretary, as I said, is saying now that the £36 billion save will allow for investments that fit the needs of the whole country. That's after the Prime Minister made his keynote speech and announced Network North to replace the northern section of the line. Last night, on Twitter, now called X, the former Prime Ministers Boris Johnson and David Cameron both criticised the decision, saying that a once-in-a-generation opportunity had been lost. Mark Harper told GB News the facts, though, have changed. Well, our apologies, we're unable to bring you that clip. Now, let's take you back to events in Ukraine. We were showing you pictures earlier on. Let's take another look at that footage where at least 51 people have died after a Russian missile hit a cafe in northeastern Ukraine. It's reported the victims were holding a memorial service at the time. Ukrainian officials called it a heinous crime. It appears to be one of the single biggest civilian death tolls since the start of the war. And lastly, here at home, the Princess of Wales has joined some of England's World Cup-winning wheelchair rugby league squad. She got stuck in as well at the event in Hull, where she sat in a wheelchair for herself and gave the game a go. Kate, who's patron of the Rugby Football League, is there to promote inclusivity in the sport, much to the delight of the participants involved. You're with GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back, and we start with the big news in the battle to solve the migrant crisis. Britain is about to sign a deal that will give us access to EU intelligence. And in fact, Rishi Sunak has been over in Spain, in Granada, trying to thrash this out with our European friends. What is fascinating is that actually, until a few weeks ago, the Spanish were adamant they didn't even want to discuss this at this particular meeting. But more than 25,000 migrants have crossed the Channel this year. We've also been reporting widely about what's been going on in Lampedusa, what's been going on in Greece, and the mass transportation of human cargo and human traffic right across Europe. Nations becoming increasingly frustrated. Germany and France have now said that they are going to shut their borders to anyone who's passed through Italy, which is remarkable considering that the vast majority of them, that's not quite true, a lot of them are coming through Italy. But a deal with the Frontex border agency could be confirmed next week. What will this mean? Well, it means that Border Force officials will be able to keep track of migrant movements and people smuggling across Europe. Couple of big points on this. Firstly, it could well suck the wind out of Keir Starmer's sails. The Labour Party conference starts over the weekend and then into early next week. And at that, what Labour really are expected to have said was, we have got some kind of closer cooperation with our European friends and allies. Of course, we never really wanted to leave the European Union at all, but given that the Tories forced that through, this is the best that we can do. We've gone to meet people at Frontex. We've gone to meet Emmanuel Macron. Look how wonderful Labour is. We can solve the migrant crisis with greater international cooperation. Well, what Rishi Sunak has done is just do that now, apparently. So, taking the wind out of their sails. The second part of it is, a lot of people are saying, well, we should never have left the European Union. This is a big demonstration of that. We're now trying to go back into something that we were in the first place. Again, the flip side is, well, was it working at the time? Did it work at the time? And will this work? Richard Tice, the leader of Reform and now of this parish, was very vocal earlier on, saying the only thing that will work is turning back the boats. And greater international cooperation is not actually the answer when it comes to a European setting because of a fundamental lack of political will. But joining me now is the former Chief Immigration Officer of the UK Border Force. It's Kevin Saunders. Kevin, thank you very, very much. Will working more closely with Frontex actually make a blind bit of difference?
It will make a small bit difference, but it won't make a huge difference. Richard is right. The only way to stop this problem is to stop the boats actually coming. Before Brexit, we were an associate member of Frontex, so it meant we didn't have full membership, but we did bits and pieces with them. Sharing intelligence is always good, but sharing intelligence won't stop the boats.
OK, all right. So you think that maybe a bit too much could be made of this, and when they're talking about a Europe-wide solution, possibly the only Europe-wide solution would be to stop them entering Europe?
Yes, it would. The trouble is, we've heard people talk about a Europe-wide solution for years, but Europe is totally divided on this. I mean, did you know that Hungary, for example, has only taken 47 migrants? Poland will take Ukrainians, but they won't take anybody else.
Yeah.
They're putting barriers up all over the place. I mean, the French have actually closed the crossing into Italy on their border. So it's ridiculous. The Europeans can't agree on anything.
I suppose that's what they're trying to do now, bizarrely as well. The next meeting of this particular European group is taking place in England in spring, which should possibly be just before our general election. So that will be interesting politically. Some people would say, look, when we were members of the European Union, we could have done more. We had returns agreements, and we would have been having more intelligence to tackle the human traffickers, and that now us trying to get back involved with something is a visible sign of Brexiteer weakness. What do you think of that?
No, Patrick, we've got to get away from this nonsense that before Brexit everything was wonderful. The returns agreement didn't work before Brexit. We took more people from Europe than they took from us. The only people that played the game with prior to Brexit was Ireland. None of the other Europeans did. It was a total and absolute mess. Okay. So let's get away from this. Before Brexit, everything was wonderful. It wasn't.
I also think when it comes to the human traffickers, by the way, Kevin, as well, it's talking about, oh, well, right, OK, if we can share intelligence with Frontex on human trafficking, I would have thought, by definition, if we were just to come and do more of that, they're already doing a lot, and they are clearly already not smashing the human traffickers. So unless it is only Britain with the intelligence, Kevin, that could lead to us crushing these human trafficking gangs, what is the benefit of working all together, or am I being a bit naive there?
No, you're completely right, Patrick. I mean, 125,000 going into Italy alone, and they've got Frontex. It's ridiculous.
Right.
What needs to be done is a single European approach, but you won't get that.
No.
So what you've got to do is you've got to get the southern European countries, Spain, France, Italy, and Greece, working together to stop the boats coming across the Mediterranean.
Or the entire European Union nations' navies go and patrol, the sea, I suppose, where the entry point is around Italy, around Greece, and around places like that. Maybe that could be something. And the external borders of the EU. For what it's worth, apparently 72% of people who live within the European Union want the European Union to do more to preserve its external borders. So it shouldn't be a particularly unpopular decision. But, Kevin, we're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid, my good man. Thank you very, very much. We're a bit out of time because Kevin Saunders there, who is the former Chief Immigration Officer of the UK Border Force. I'm not sure it'll make a huge amount of difference. Certainly, that's not really the view of Dennis McShane, Richard Tice or Kevin Saunders, the three people that I've spoken to about this right now. But I tell you where I think it might make a difference. It might make a difference politically in this country, which means nothing, by the way, if you're worried about having a migrant hotel near where you live or spending a load of taxpayers' money on the migrant crisis. But politically, it could well make a difference. Why? Because when Keir Starmer stands up and says, this is what I want to do to tackle the migrant crisis, if it's exactly the same as what Rishi Sunak is basically about to go and announce, but Keir Starmer also won't say anything when it comes to flying people to Rwanda, then you could argue, if you were a Conservative, that the Tories want to do more, and that may well be important at the next election. Moving on, although you can get more on this story on our website, how could I forget? GBNews.com. It's the fastest growing national news site in the country. It's got the best analysis, big opinion and the latest breaking news. But here's something else that I think is symptomatic of a bigger problem in society. So if Rishi Sunak gets his way, in a few years' time, some adults will be banned from buying cigarettes. 6.4 million people in the UK smoke, but if Sunak has unveiled plans to make it an offence for anyone born in 2009 or afterwards to be sold tobacco products. So the legal smoking age would then be increased every year. They did this in New Zealand, which brackets itself as a lovely, fluffy, soft democracy of liberalism, but is actually, as was evidenced during the coronavirus crisis, one of the most totalitarian and authoritarian countries that I've ever seen. So it just doesn't really sit that well with me. I get that smoking's bad for you. I get that a minority of people smoke. I get that people don't like the smell. All of this stuff. But I just don't think it's right to ban things, keep banning them and banning them and banning them. And we will end up in a situation where a 40-year-old man is standing outside a Spar or a corner shop in Basingstoke asking a 41-year-old man to go in and buy him a packet of Marlboro Golds. And that is ridiculous. Let's speak now, though, to Dr. Sudhanshu Patwardhan from the Centre of Health Research and Education at Southampton University. Thank you very, very much. So, do you think this will actually make a massive health difference to society to the point where we need to ban it all?
First of all, thank you so much for having me on this show. Just a quick correction. I am based in Southampton at the University of Southampton Science Park, so I'm not at the university per se. And our Centre for Health Research and Education is a private healthcare company. We are working in tobacco cessation, and a lot of our work is done in the UK, but also in South Asia, particularly in India. So let's jump to the topic. What exactly is the question you want to ask?
What's the point of banning smoking?
Well, smoking, look, I'm a doctor by training, and it's very evident that tobacco smoking, especially in the UK, where over the last few decades, policies have been put in place which have chipped away at the number of people smoking, and the prevalence has significantly dropped down. But you know what? You mentioned 6.4 million people continue to smoke tobacco in this country. If you look at the data, it is very evident that tobacco use is an inequalities issue, which means that those who are socioeconomically disadvantaged are more likely to be smoking, and that's essentially widening the inequity gap. So anything that is going to help current smokers from quitting tobacco is a good policy measure, and I think that's what I like to focus on. Now, if you want to talk about this proposed policy measure for future tobacco users, look, it can't be treated in isolation. It has to be part of a broader mix of policies. And bear in mind, this comes from a recommendation by Dr. Javed Khan from his report, independent report that he published last year on the government's commissioning. And this was one of the policy measures, but this is not the only one.
But it's not going to work, is it? I mean, cocaine's always illegal, and we've got more cocaine users than we've ever had in this country.
Look, I do not know the numbers about what happens with other drugs used. This is about sending the right message. And think of it, for the first time in the last few years since COVID, a government, and I believe other political parties are all aligned with this policy goal with regards to public health. Now, how often do we get public health to be on the top of the country's agenda?
Well, actually, it's interesting, but it's interesting you said since COVID, right? Because during COVID, we had a load of incredibly draconian measures placed on us by medical professionals that actually turned out to destroy a lot of people's lives and lead to a lot of excess deaths. That has happened, OK? So why should we now, as a nation, be told by medical professionals what I, as a consenting adult, can and can't do? Why do you want to control my life?
I do not want to control anyone's life here. I think my role, and as a medical practitioner, I believe that those smokers who need help to quit should be given and offered that help. And I think government's role is to make sure that that opportunity is available. So look
by banning
the biggest.
They're banning it. It's not extra nicotine patches. They're not going around saying, "Do you want to quit? Here's a vape." They're banning it.
Yeah, and that's where I think the discussion really has to move away from what the policy measure is going to do, but what are the solutions being offered to current smokers. I always feel that any of these debates often forget that those 6 million plus people in this country and another billion plus around the world are not getting the right level of advice from their governments, from their medical practitioners, people around them. And I think that part of the debate is always sort of forgotten. It's almost like the government, the healthcare practitioners saying, you know what, we do not really care about your health, and we know you're going to die 15 years earlier because of smoking, but we want to focus on only on the future generations, which is important, but not the only thing to focus on. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, not really, because on the packets of cigarettes, you've got a picture of a diseased lung, a throat tumour, or one of them, it's my personal favourite, is a man crying in the fetal position on the bed to say how smoking causes impotence, right? So we don't have any branding on them, so everybody knows that smoking is bad for you. But sometimes a hypothetical 31-year-old man walks into a newsagent and wants to buy himself a packet of cigarettes because as an adult he makes that decision. Why shouldn't I be allowed to do that?
That's a great question about personal choice. And look, as a medical professional, I'm not going to get into the debate about where does one draw the line on personal choice. I'm so sorry to say that. I think where we have to not forget is if an adult is smoking, that is affecting their chance of living a happier, healthier, longer life, and for those around them. And it's up to healthcare professionals, governments, and those around them to be able to at least offer this support to quit nasty forms of tobacco.
Well, do you think we should ban junk food? Do you think that we should ban burgers being sold to children?
No, look, I think that is a debate that always goes on, right, in the society. And where do you draw the line, what is acceptable and what is not? And I do not wish to get dragged purely because there are many more experts who can talk about it. What I can talk about is, look, the next generation of nicotine users in this country is absolutely not required because currently the view that is prevalent is that tobacco products that are in the market are causing only harm and nothing else. And I completely sign up to that. Now, let's switch gears and look at where does nicotine fit in this broader context here. And I would like to just take a minute to talk about this, please. Tobacco products, so combustible or smoked cigarette products, for example, or even smokeless products that are very commonly used among the South Asian diaspora in the UK, and there's about a few 100,000 people here who consume those products. These cause the harms from tobacco, either burnt tobacco or toxicants. Now, nicotine in these products is the dependence-causing chemical psychoactive substance. However, people often mix the two up in terms of mentally thinking that they're all the same thing. And a recent survey that I was quite fortunate to see the data from, and it's now public domain, is that shows that doctors around the world, around 12 countries where this survey was conducted among 15,000 doctors, they wrongly believe that nicotine in these tobacco products causes cancer. Now imagine the same doctors are expected to provide, you mentioned nicotine patches earlier, right? Nicotine patches, or in those countries where electronic cigarettes are approved and allowed, or even nicotine pouches. Doctors will not recommend these products to their patients for long-term use, to quit smoking or to quit tobacco, because they have they harbor these wrong perceptions. And I think that's the big area of what we need to work on. That's what we really do in our center, trying to educate healthcare practitioners to be better at supporting the current users of tobacco. And that, I think, is a big job in itself.
Good stuff. Well, thank you very, very much for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure, I must say. Great to get your views. Dr. Suhanshu Patwarden there from the Centre for Health Research somewhere near Southampton University, I think. Anyway, more than 100,000 race hate crimes were recorded by police in just 12 months. That, believe it or not, is down by 6% on the previous year. So what does that tell us about the state of Britain in 2023? Patrick Christys, GB News, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening. from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. It is 27 minutes past 5. You're watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, a little later this hour, I'll give my take on a new gender-neutral British Airways uniform that had been branded an attack on women. Yes, OK, all right. British Airways, by the way, I've got a view or two on them, but I'll save that. Now, the number of hate crimes recorded by police has dropped for the first time in a decade. So there's been a 6% fall in race hate crimes in England and Wales. What does this tell us? Well, Kemi Badenoch told the Tory party conference on Tuesday that the UK is the best country in the world to be black. She also criticised Labour. Kemi.
They want young people to believe a narrative of hopelessness, a narrative that says there is no point in trying because British society is against you and you're better off asking for reparations. A narrative that tells children like mine that the odds are stacked against them. I tell my children that this is the best country in the world to be black because it is a country that sees people, not labels.
OK, so I'm joined now by the actor and anti-racism campaigner Femi Nylander. Femi, thank you very much for joining me. So we've got numerous different ethnic minorities in government and in the Labour Party as well. We've also got the fact that race hate crimes apparently are down 6%, despite there being more ethnic minorities in the country than ever before. We're doing all right, aren't we?
I mean, as you said, it's down for the first time in 6 years. So what this really shows is that over the whole period of Brexit, over the whole period that we've seen the rise of this kind of very, very, very anti-migrant conservative government, it's been rising. And now, yes, it's fallen, or at least reported incidents have fallen, which doesn't necessarily say that the actual incidents have fallen. That might represent a decrease in trust in institutions like the police, because obviously when my bike gets nicked, I never report it to the police because I never think the police are going to do anything about it. I've had about 3 bikes nicked. I reported the first 2 and they didn't get found. So the third one, I didn't report it. The same thing. If I don't believe that the police are going to do anything about a race hate crime, because I see what this government is saying, I see what's going on in the country at the moment, then I'm less likely to take it forward. So yes, it might be possible that it has fallen, but then remember, it's been rising for 6 years. So it's not necessarily the best of things. But I mean, if it is, then of course I'm happy to have less racially aggravated hate crimes. But no, I wouldn't take it as a
One thing I found interesting. One thing I find interesting about recent discussions, I mean, it ties into this, is we had a big conversation as a nation, apparently, about whether or not multiculturalism has failed. Suella Braverman was saying that it has. And then a load of people on the left were saying, how dare she say this, multiculturalism has not failed in this country. But then a load of those same people always seem to think that we're a racist country. And I didn't quite understand that, but maybe that's because I'm a bit thick. Your thoughts?
Sure, you don't understand... So, multiculturalism... How can multiculturalism have succeeded and the country still be racist? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, basically.
Is that the question? I mean, you can have something that kind of succeeds on some parameters and fails on other parameters. You can say that Britain is a better place for having a diverse range of peoples and languages and religions seated within. And Britain is, and I'd say that if you go to somewhere like London, a lot of people will say, oh, London, it's turned into Bangladesh, it's turned into Africa. But I think that's one of the best things. In most countries in the world, I can only go to if I go to the capital city, I'll meet one kind of person. If I go to somewhere like Sweden, I'll meet mostly Swedish people. If I go to somewhere like Kazakhstan, everyone's going to be Kazakh. London's a place where I can go. I love learning languages. I love learning different cultures. I can go to London and I can know that I can meet people from different cultures. I think that's a wonderful thing. If that has been accompanied with some elements of British society getting more scared about minorities, getting more scared about different cultures coming over and cultural mixing, then that's perfectly possible. It's perfectly possible to have something good happen and have people react to it as though it's something bad.
Yeah, I just listen to what you're saying there. You know, you're saying that like London, especially, is a great city, it's full of multicultural, probably the most multicultural city in the world, arguably your favourite city in the world. You've got that on your doorstep. You're an anti-racism campaigner. We're seeing that race hate crimes are down as well. I'd have thought you'd be cock-a-hoop about all of this. You've succeeded. You're very close to your life's ambition being complete. No, but you're still miserable about it.
I'm not very close to my life's ambition being complete. I'm just saying it's a good thing that London, a city like London, has different. I can go there and I can find out about Hispanic people. I can go there and I can find out about what people live like, how they, what they believe in different parts of the world. That doesn't mean that the criminal justice system in the UK doesn't have a long way to go. That doesn't mean that the kind of speech Suella Braverman gave, where she said that there was a hurricane coming of migrants, is not ridiculous scaremongering. That doesn't mean that I myself am not more likely to get stopped and searched than you. It's like the two things can exist at the same time.
OK, good stuff. Femi, thank you very much. I do really always genuinely enjoy our chat, so I'll see you very soon. It's Femi Nylander there. He's an actor and anti-racism campaigner. Now, there's loads more to come between now and 6. The cost of renting, record high. But I'm going to ask, are young people too entitled when it comes to home ownership? But now, though, it's your headlines with Polly McClellan.
Patrick, thank you. The top stories this hour. A man who broke into Windsor Castle armed with a loaded crossbow with the intention of killing the late Queen has been sentenced to 9 years for the crime of treason. Jaswant Chail was found wandering in the grounds of Windsor Castle on Christmas Day 2021 while the late Queen was in residence. The judge said Chail was culpable when he devised his plot but had lost touch with reality and become psychotic by the time he carried it out. Also in the news today, at least 51 people have died after a Russian missile hit a cafe in northeastern Ukraine. It's reported the victims had been holding a memorial service at the time. Ukrainian officials are calling it a heinous crime. And here, the coach driver killed in the Wirral bus crash has been described as having suffered an event at the wheel before the incident, which also killed a 15-year-old girl, according to a coroner's court hearing today. CCTV footage showed David Shrimpton slump in the cabin to the left whilst he was driving. 54 people were on the bus when it overturned on the M53 last Friday. Those are the headlines. More on all those stories by heading to our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
OK, let's take a look at the numbers for you. In the pound today, buying you $1.2175 and 1.1560 euros. The price of gold is £1,493 an ounce. And the FTSE 100 has closed the day at 7,451 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Debate time now, because the average rent for UK homes outside of London has reached record highs of almost £1,300 a month. That is according to the property portal Rightmove. In fact, the overall stats are absolutely astonishing. Apparently, the average rental price per month in London is £2,600. But places like Preston as well, so not the usual place where you might think rents are going to surge, they've shot up. Average rents have shot up. And so now, more so than ever, I think, it's more unaffordable, more unobtainable for people to buy their own home. So I'm asking whether or not young people just need to give up on that dream, or actually, could young people buy their own home if they stop doing things like going out, smashing cocktails and smearing avocado on everything? Here to discuss this is Jason Reed, who's the head of global projects at Young Voices, and the former special advisor to Michael Gove, Charlie Rowley. Both of you, thank you very much. Charlie, where are you on this? Should young people just stop banging on about home ownership and maybe live their lives better, save a bit of cash and buy one day?
Well, no one should give up on the prospect of owning their own home. You're absolutely right that, rents are going up. That's something that we all have to be wary of. But no, you're absolutely right. Young people should be able to hold on to that dream, because it is actually, if you look at people that do own their own home, their monthly payments in terms of a mortgage are far less now than renting. The problem is that we don't have the housing supply in this country, so we absolutely need to build more homes all of the time, everywhere, to make sure that we're addressing that supply issue and making sure that people have the deposit to put down in the first instance. We had the Help to Buy scheme previously. That ended because it was quite costly for the government, didn't help as many people as it might have done. So getting the deposit and the supply will help people go on to own their own home. OK, all right, I will enter into the fray now. The wonderful Jason Reed. Jason,
Yeah, where are you on this? And look, back in the day, older people, they worked 3 jobs. They didn't go on foreign holidays. They didn't have fancy, nice things. They just saved for a house.
I'm afraid young people being unable to buy a house has got absolutely nothing to do with their spending habits. All the evidence shows that young people are partying less, drinking less, going out less than past generations. And yet they're further than past generations from buying a house because the cost of housing has skyrocketed, both for buying and for renting. I'm one of those young people who has that dream of buying a house. And at the moment, it looks like it's going to remain a dream because the prices are just stratospheric at this point. And we're seeing the result of that in the rental market. Of course, interest rates are squeezing a lot of landlords out of the rental market, as well as other obstacles put in place by the government, things like energy certificates and other taxes imposed, which means there's a lower supply of rental properties as well. And that means that people are struggling to get a rental property. We're seeing huge queues of 20, 25 people bidding for the same property. People ask for a year of rent up front, which of course the majority of people cannot afford. It's just not a pretty situation at all. The only way out of it is to build a lot more.
OK, well, Charlie, Rishi Sunak was banging on, wasn't he? Long-term decision-making for a better future. I mean, the thing staring him in the face there was building places for people to live, and he just swerved that completely. Why?
Well, I think the conference was predominantly about taking the long-term decisions for the country, and that's focusing on things like HS2 that have been leaked, dealing with the education system, and other such announcements. It wasn't a packed conference full of policy announcements, but I think over time we will see more announcements being made, particularly on housing, because I think it is something that has blighted governments, Labour and Conservative, for decades. So making sure that Rishi, I think what he'll want to do is to make sure he's across all of the detail of all of the issues, why we're not building enough homes, and see that through.
One thing, Jason, that stands out to me is that predominantly, I think it was ever thus, by the way, younger people tend to be more likely to probably be a bit more left-wing and maybe a bit more in favour of open borders and mass migration and all of that stuff. Isn't the irony, if more young people wanted massive controls on migration, we might have more housing to go around?
Well, I think this is a common red herring. Immigration has got nothing to do with the housing shortage in this country. Even if immigration dropped to 0 tomorrow, we would still have a significant housing shortage in this country. The problem is that we are not building enough. It's as simple as that. Immigrants contribute to economic growth, just like building more housing would do. All we need is a bit of political will to get behind a significant building agenda. But unfortunately, we're going in the wrong direction. We're seeing more regulations put in place. We're seeing the housing target has
Jason,
been...
Yeah, I mean, look, Jason, I do, yeah, we're a broad church here at GBNews. I mean, with absolute respect, I can't let you get away with saying that mass immigration has had nothing to do with the housing shortage. I mean, they are living in houses, Jason.
Yes, but that doesn't mean we should stop immigration in order to deal with the housing crisis. The two issues are not related. Immigration contributes a huge amount to economic growth, and there's plenty of other reasons why immigration is a good thing for the country as well. If nothing else, just the fact that I think it benefits us to have the best minds from around the world coming and wanting to live and study and work in Britain.
Well, what do you think of that, Charlie? Just in the sense of, let's say we allow another 500,000 people next year to come, and we haven't... I mean, they're going to have to live somewhere. I mean, that surely is a pressure on the housing market.
It absolutely is. It's just a fact. The more people you have in the country and the more housing, or the less housing that you have available. So we've got to make sure you get the balance between immigration to fill the jobs that are in the economy, but also making sure that you are encouraging local communities and local authorities to approve planning permissions in a sustainable way that doesn't put too much other pressure on other public services to allow local people to buy the homes that they need.
Jason, would you slap a load of houses on the green belt then? What would you just paint the countryside grey?
There are a load of thousands of sites in this country that are brownfield, that are ripe for development, that we are not developing. And the problem we've got is an incentive one. Other countries around the world are finding creative solutions to this. The Conservative Party of Canada, for example, is campaigning really hard on housing and has a huge polling lead, by the way. They want to effectively hold local government funding hostage and tell the local authorities, you've got to build houses in your area, in the most high demand areas, otherwise you won't get your funding. I think that's a great idea. At the moment in this country, it's too easy for people in local government to just block every housing project that comes across their desk and hope that someone else will fix the problem. And the result is nothing gets built and prices just keep going up.
I wonder whether or not there's a problem with just the amount of places that people want to live now. So, dare I say it, people might shout at their TV screens now, but I think the world was a smaller place, maybe back in the day before social media, before the ease with which people can become global citizens, as it were. So maybe, Charlie, people were more inclined to, live in Huddersfield, die in Huddersfield, OK? Whereas now, people might go, oh, well, I want to move to London. And so we end up with a situation where we have a huge population in a smaller, concentrated area. And actually, maybe if we did, dare I say it, level up a bit more, that might help a bit with the housing crisis.
Patrick, I think you've just hit the nail totally on the head. Housing policy is always catching up. It takes a long time to build a house or to build a community or a set of houses and units. And previously, I think you're absolutely right. People were happy to travel or to stay in their local area. They then sort of saw London as the beacon of opportunity or the city areas, so they moved to the city. But now, you're absolutely right. In order to level up this country, you should be able to stay local and go far because the opportunities should be right on your doorstep. So wherever you are, perhaps as a student, you should be able to stay in your local area or live nearby and have the same opportunities, the same housing prospects, the same health prospects, education, job opportunities, just as anybody else in London. But until we invest in terms of building those homes, until we invest in those public services, where those homes need to be built, then we're always going to be chasing our tail.
All right, chaps, thank you very, very much. Great to have you both on the show. It's Jason Reed there, who's head of global projects at Young Voices and the former special advisor to Michael Gove. Charlie Rowley. Now, no doubt that will be kicking off in the inbox. I will delve in there shortly, gbviews at gbnews.com. But British Airways has been criticised over new gender-neutral uniforms for cabin crew. Apparently, some female BA staff say it's an attack on women. Other people say it's just plain stupid. Patrick, Christys on GB News, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, 5:47. You are watching or listening to me, Patrick Christys, on GB News. Now, female staff at British Airways are fuming over what they call cheap uniforms aimed at the airline's non-binary cabin crew members. Only recently, the airline relaxed their uniform policy to allow male crew members to wear makeup and carry handbags. Can I just say, right, that it was not recently that male stewards or cabin crew have started wearing makeup, is it? And anyone that thinks that male air stewards recently started wearing makeup and that is a new thing, I think hasn't ever been flying, have they? But BA launched this new uniform for the first time in almost 2 decades, saying that it was designed to take the airline into the next chapter. Well, it's interesting, really, isn't it, that? And how would you feel about that? I suppose no one's forcing anything on anyone, are they? They're not forcing men to wear skirts or women to wear trouser suits or anything along those lines. But can I just make a broader point about British Airways, right, which is that it is now a budget airline. British Airways doesn't do what Ryanair does. Ryanair is very open about the idea that they would strap you to the wings of that plane if they could get away with it and fly as many of you as quickly as possible wherever you wanted to go, and they would keep doing that to make as much money as feasible. Ryanair, very open and honest about that, OK? British Airways gives the pretence of luxury. It tries to claim, look at this, it's suave, it's class, it's great, isn't it? It's not, it's ridiculous. When I went on holiday, I couldn't even get a sandwich on that plane, there or back. My producer here flew British Airways, was delayed by 48 hours the other day. I had a great day, he wasn't here, but it's not the point, OK? It's not the point. British Airways, everyone I seem to know at the moment has a problem with British Airways. Of course, British Airways would no doubt dispute all of this and make a cogent argument for how great a product they provide for the nation. In fact, last year, British Airways issued the following statement. We are proud of all of our colleagues at British Airways and we are committed to an inclusive working environment. We have worked with our people to create updated guidelines for grooming. Got the wrong end of the stick there. Beauty and accessories, allowing our colleagues to bring the best, most authentic version of themselves to work every day. British Airways, all I want from you is to bring a plane to the runway every day. When I pay for it, I want to know it's going to turn up. And here's another little piece of advice for you, right? If you know that you've got this amount of people on an aeroplane, OK, and every single flight goes off and you get halfway down that airline and you've run out of food, provide more food. Just seriously. Right, anyway, bad experience on BA. I'll stop with that now. Let's catch up with our old friends at Just Stop Oil. 5 people were arrested after protesters invaded the stage at a performance of Les Miserables yesterday evening. Here's what happened. What I find interesting about this is that old phrase, the show must go on, well, it didn't go on, did it? It didn't go on. They capitulated to a load of gobby young individuals who've probably got excessive armpit and leg hair, gluing themselves or doing whatever they're doing to a stage, shouting about oil to a group of people who are probably already politically aligned to them, to make no difference to the wider world whatsoever, OK? And yet that show ended. That was it. Finito, a miserable evening, as they say. But yes. Here's another little story that's caught my eye before I delve into the terrifying world of my inbox. A British brewery that was shipped brick by brick to Pyongyang, of all places, has been honoured as one of North Korea's top 10 businesses. The brewery was previously based in Wiltshire, but has been open in the communist country for 21 years. State media reported that the unpronounceable beer factory has been praised for its contribution to the 5-year plan for national economic development. I just wonder how that situation ever happened. Do you think there were some people just casually brewing away in Wiltshire, going about their business, and then the delegation from North Korea rocks up and they go, here's £1.5 million to buy your brewery. They take it apart, brick by brick, fly it over to Pyongyang, and now Pyongyang has Wiltshire-based beer. Fascinating stuff. I'm going to finish the show by going into my inbox, and the thing that pops off most is Kevin Keegan's comments about whether or not female football pundits, well, not quite should exist, but whether they should commentate and give their punditry on the men's game. He just said he doesn't really like it, OK? I've got to be honest, I'm not saying that I would have said that out loud, but I do know a huge amount of male football fans who think that having female pundits is not necessarily the best thing in the world. They do question why there are never appeared to be many male pundits on the women's games. And also, when you're looking for the football results on prominent news websites, it's easy to fall foul of clicking on the wrong fixture, isn't it? Because they don't tend to say women's game. They dress it up as tonight, Arsenal v Chelsea. And it turns out it's not. But anyway, Jane says, equality for a woman who develops her career in sport coverage is important. But also, men need something of their own. The push of female into the male domain for the sake of making a point of equality negates true equality. Jane, that's profound. I like that. Thank you very, very much. We've also here got Kevin Keegan was bang on, and his view is echoed by the vast majority of football fans I know, including the women. Yet another example where the vast majority of us are supposed to shut up and accept a minority view. He goes on to say, though, I do agree, however, with Kevin Keegan's assessment of Gabby Yorath, which I believe is Gabby Logan, because Kevin Keegan did say that he liked her. She is brilliant and far more talented than Gary Lineker. So there you go. It's a mixed bag in the inbox, but I can't help but wonder whether or not really Kevin Keegan, despite now it definitely going to get himself cancelled, will almost definitely never work as a pundit again and be classed as being, you know, unsafe to be had around news channels everywhere. Probably does have the majority view on this, but there we go. Thank you very much for everybody who's been emailing in, who's been getting in touch. As you can see, Jubes will be up next with Jubes and co, Michelle Dewberry. Then it'll be Nigel Farage. Then it'll be Jacob Rees-Mogg. Then it'll be me. I am on 9 till 11 p.m. Join me.
Hi there, it's Aidan McKibben here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Big contrasts north to south across the country over the next few days. Mostly fine in the south and increasingly warm, but it's cloudier, it's breezier and it's wetter further north. Certainly the case for the rest of Thursday. We've got low pressure sitting to the northwest of Scotland. Weather fronts pushing in. Those weather fronts bringing some persistent rain, especially for the higher parts of Wales, northern England and Scotland. Spells of rain elsewhere across the northern 2/3 of the UK, but for southern counties of Wales, southern England, it's mostly dry as we end Thursday and go into Friday. A lot of cloud remaining, still breezy overnight, and as a result, it's a mild night virtually everywhere. Now, one band of rain clears the Northern Isles first thing on Friday. Another band of rain pushes some persistent wet weather into Northern Ireland, central and southern Scotland, northern England, North Wales. Either side of that, some brightness. Quite a strong wind blowing across the north of Scotland with the risk of gales. Less breezy further south, where it's going to be a warmer day for southern England and South Wales. Temperatures into the low 20s. Turning even warmer here over the coming days into the weekend. Temperatures up into the mid-20s possible, but it's increasingly wet for Scotland, especially Western Scotland, especially higher parts where there's the risk of more than 100 millimetres of rain building up. So that north-south contrast remains into the weekend.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show, that's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christys, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position